During NASA's November 19th livestream about the interstellar visitor, 3I Atlas, there was an odd sense of weight, as if the silence beneath their words carried more significance than the explanations themselves. They spoke at length, listing missions, instruments, and timelines, yet revealed almost no new details. The images shown were distant and dim, and much of the data was described as still being processed or not yet downlinked. They repeated several times that 3I Atlas is simply a comet, insisting on this with a deliberateness that felt calculated, almost rehearsed. And when the stream finally ended, what lingered was the sense that most of what truly matters remained off-screen. When an object arrives from beyond the solar system, you expect clarity, not this vague dancing around the essential details. Sometimes the silence surrounding a discovery becomes part of the mystery itself. The NASA livestream on November 19th promised clarity, but as it unfolded, it became clear that the structure of the briefing was designed less to inform and more to guide the public toward a single, controlled conclusion. Before presenting any new data, the panel focused on denying rumors, emphasizing repeatedly that 3I Atlas is only a comet, as if the event's top priority were shaping perception rather than sharing discoveries. They moved through rehearsed explanations, revisiting the same safe talking points. Comets behave like this. Comets release dust like that. Comets come and go. What felt unusual was how little they expanded on anything beyond that. 20 spacecraft had their eyes on 3I Atlas at different moments across multiple wavelengths, yet the livestream offered only a handful of faint images, most distant and lacking in detail. They mentioned Hubble, James Webb, Lucy, Psyche, Maven, MRO, and more. But every reference came wrapped in disclaimers, instruments pushed to their limits, angles not ideal, calibration still needed, data not ready for release. It was a long list of excuses for not showing what everyone expected to see, yet throughout it all, the tone never wavered. The speakers maintained a steady calm, careful not to hint at anything unexpected, even when describing the object's unusual chemical ratios or suggesting its origin might predate the formation of our sun. They glossed over these details quickly, as if dwelling on them would risk raising questions they weren't prepared to answer on camera. The live stream felt less like a scientific update and more like a subtle reassurance campaign, one meant to shut down the conversation before it truly began. By the end, the message was clear. 3I Atlas is ordinary. The situation is under control, and any unreleased data will come later. Yet no timeline was provided, and no raw imagery was shared. The result was a briefing filled with words but empty of revelation. A carefully managed moment that left viewers with a sense that the real answers, whatever they may be, were left somewhere just outside the frame. What stood out most in the livestream wasn't the information NASA shared, but what they carefully avoided. Time and again, they reminded the audience that much of the data on 3I Atlas still hadn't been downlinked, processed, or calibrated. It became a kind of refrain, a gentle barrier separating the public from the raw data collected by nearly 20 missions scattered across the solar system, for an event supposed to update the world on a visitor from beyond our sun. The actual content presented was remarkably sparse. NASA described a long list of instruments observing 3I Atlas, Hubble capturing its faint coma, Maven detecting molecular signatures, Lucy and Psyche imaging from distant vantage points, and yet, the livestream offered almost none of these images. Viewers were shown a handful of cropped frames. A blurry haze here, a faint streak there, nothing that matched the scale of what NASA claimed to have collected. They spoke of scientific wiggles, complex spectrographs, and high-resolution image stacks, yet kept all visual evidence off-screen. It felt like watching a weather report with no satellite images, only descriptions of what the satellites supposedly saw. Even more curious were the details they mentioned, then brushed past, almost too quickly. The unusually high carbon dioxide ratio, excess nickel relative to iron, unexpected dust polarization, and the possibility that the comet's parent system might be older than the sun itself. Each of these signals hints at something unique about 3I Atlas's history, something that warrants careful explanation. Yet they lingered only briefly before vanishing, as the conversation drifted back to safer topics. Then came the remarks about pushing instruments beyond their intended limits, as if preparing the audience for imperfections they weren't willing to display publicly. They explained that some spacecraft had to maneuver into awkward positions to catch a glimpse of the object, introducing glare and image artifacts. They acknowledged that some data could be misleading without proper calibration, implying that early release might cause confusion. And while all these reasons sound responsible on the surface, together they formed a strange pattern. NASA repeatedly emphasized why they couldn't share the data, not why they should. It wasn't that they claimed the data didn't exist, quite the opposite. They made it clear that a vast amount of information had been collected across different wavelengths, distances, and instruments, yet the livestream delivered only fragments. Carefully curated and safely uncontroversial, these fragments were paired with repeated reminders for the audience to be patient, wait for analysis, and trust the process. Yet while patience is a virtue, this selective disclosure created an unsettling contrast. NASA insisted that nothing unusual was occurring, yet their reluctance to share the full picture lent an air of heaviness to the proceedings, as if the silence itself were shielding something the public wasn't meant to see just yet. As the live stream neared its final minutes, the most striking element wasn't a revelation, a discovery, or a new image. It was the pattern of silence that framed every answer. Whenever someone asked about unusual behavior, unexpected signals, or the true significance of an object arriving from beyond the solar system, responses softened, the pace slowed, and explanations dissolved into vague layers of non-answer. NASA emphasized that 3I Atlas behaves like a comet, yet the very anomalies they rushed past hinted at a story far older and more complex than the one they were willing to unpack on camera. They spoke of its possible origin in a star system older than the Sun, yet avoided dwelling on what that truly implies. They mentioned unusual chemical ratios and dust properties rarely observed in local comets, yet quickly shifted back to familiar comparisons. They acknowledged subtle non-gravitational forces acting on the object, yet framed them as routine, even though such forces are rarely identical from one comet to the next. Each detail surfaced for a moment, like a faint signal in static, and then slipped back into the comfortable narrative that nothing here should surprise us. What made the silence even more noticeable was the disconnect between the questions asked and the answers given. Queries about the comet's shape, composition, origin, and gaps in the data were met with phrases like "too early to know," "uncertain," or "still being analyzed." It's natural for science to take time, but the hesitation felt less like the rhythm of research and more like the careful management of public expectations, as if the safest path was to keep everything within a narrow frame until they could control the entire narrative. There's a long history of agencies withholding preliminary data to avoid public confusion, and maybe that's all this is. But when something arrives from interstellar space, something untouched by our sun, something carrying the chemical fingerprint of a place we've never seen, the instinct to pigeonhole it as an ordinary comet feels strangely defensive. Perhaps they fear speculation, perhaps they fear misinterpretation, or maybe the real fear is that this years-long interstellar visitor has brought signals that don't fit neatly into the models we're accustomed to. In the end, the livestream revealed very little, not because nothing was discovered, but because the most intriguing pieces were left lingering between the lines. Silence often signals discomfort, and discomfort suggests the story is still shifting beneath the surface. Whether 3I Atlas is ordinary or not, it has already forced NASA to choose its words more carefully than usual, withholding the very data that might answer the questions their audience hasn't stopped asking. And when silence appears this consistently, it becomes part of the mystery, a quiet shadow stretching just beyond the edge of what we are permitted to see. When NASA's November 19th livestream finally ended, what lingered wasn't what they showed, but everything left unspoken. The update on 3I Atlas came wrapped in calm explanations and promises of data later. Yet the most intriguing details, from its unusual chemistry to its possible ancient origin and odd behavior, were glossed over quickly, almost cautiously. The silence surrounding it felt heavier than the information itself. Maybe they're still trying to make sense of what they captured. Maybe they're avoiding speculation, or simply waiting until the data fits a neat narrative. But when something drifts in from beyond the solar system, something older than our sun, silence becomes part of the mystery. It hints that the full picture sits just beyond view, held back by uncertainty or by intention. As 3i Atlas moves away, the questions it raised linger, and if you sense the same tension between what was said and what wasn't, stay close. This channel exists for those quiet gaps where official narratives thin out, and the darkness feels a little more honest. Subscribe if you want to keep exploring these hidden edges, and leave a like so this message reaches others who are listening for the silence behind the answers.